This is episode 108 of Stand Up with Pete Dominic. Joining me today is CNN's John Avlon and former congressman from South Carolina, also CNN contributor and the author of a new memoir, My Vanishing Country, my old friend Bakari Sellers. John Avlon, Bakari Sellers. It's time to stand up with me right now. Let's roll, Tim. Hello and welcome to Stand Up. Thank you very much for joining me each and every day. Daily. This show is on every damn day. And I love every second of it. All right, not every second of it. Sometimes it's pretty challenging. Some late nights, a lot of work, but I enjoy the hell out of it. Thank you very much for your support. If you are not supporting me with a paid subscription, go now to patreon.com/PeteDominic. And sign up for a paid subscription. Let's Roll Tim is something I say at the beginning of the show now because longtime listener and subscriber Tim Fox mentioned that to me one time. He said, let's roll, an email or a message. I forget. What is the origin of that, Tim? You'll have to remind me. And I always like that phrase because let's roll is what was purported to be said by one of the passengers on one of the flights on September 11th. Might be an urban myth, might be a misunderstanding, but I like to believe that let's roll was said as these passengers stood up and took on the hijackers on that plane that sadly ended up crashing into a wide open field in Pennsylvania. And I've always liked that phrase because of that, but so that's why I say it. Another longtime listener and subscriber Kim said, who's Tim, by the way? Let's roll Tim? I feel like I'm missing something. That's why. And on the same day that Kim asked that, Tim reached out and said, I really appreciate that you say let's roll Tim at the beginning of the broadcast. That means a lot. It brings so much joy to me every day with such thoughtful conversation with important people. Well, there you go, Kim and Tim. Let's roll. Two separate subscribers living in two separate parts of the country. I think Tim's in Ohio. Anyway, Kim is in Iowa. I've got two great guests joining me today. It's been a while since John Avlon was on the show, and not my fault. It's a CNN PR. I was not having issues. It was just a matter of like getting it approved that all the CNN people could continue to join me here on the podcast. And so John joins me, and it's great to catch up with him. And we talked a little bit about work-life balance. We talked a little bit, obviously, a lot about politics and more. And I'm very excited to have Bakari Sellers on the show for the first time here on the podcast. He joined me several times on SiriusXM, and we met because we were on the same panel back in 2012 during I think it was like October 2012, during the Romney and Obama homestretch at the conventions is where I think I met Bakari. He was a former state congressman from South Carolina and has, turns out, a fascinating life story. He's written a new book about it called My Vanishing Country, a memoir, and I can't put it down. I'm thoroughly enjoying it. And in addition to all the issues that he's dealt with in his life, he and his wife gave birth, Ellen gave birth to twins in 2019, and it was a very traumatic experience. She almost died. He writes about it in the book. It's crazy and really important to read. And she attributes the fact that she lived to the fact that she handpicked these black female doctors who really understood what she was dealing with. And it's just so mind-blowing and interesting, this entire book. But they had twins, and Sadie and Stokely are their names. And Bakari is the son of a civil rights icon. We talk about Cleveland Sellers is Bakari Sellers' dad. And Sadie, his beautiful baby girl, had an issue where she needed a transplant, a liver transplant, and she got it. And apparently she's doing well, and she pays us a visit during this interview, and I've just shared that video on Twitter for you. You'll do yourself a favor and go watch that video of Bakari bringing his beautiful little girl on his lap during our interview, and you can hear it here, but you can watch it on Twitter, and I'll post this whole interview on YouTube as well eventually. But lots to do, so let's get right to my conversation with Bakari Sellers. He's on Twitter at Bakari_Sellers. His new book is My Vanishing Country, a memoir. And after I get done talking to him, my conversation with John Avlon coming up, which is also and always great. That's what I've got for you today. So let's get to it right now. Waste no more time because we had a great conversation, Bakari and I, and here it is.
What's up, brother?
Yeah. So cool.
Man, we gotta grab a beer or something or chat in person one day soon, man.
Now, we're never going to see people again.
Nah.
We're never going to see people in person again, you silly goose. Congratulations.
Thank you, my brother. Thank you so much. How you been doing, man? You look good.
I've been all right, but I been on a roller coaster myself, but sounds like not quite the roller coaster that you've been on apparently your whole life. Not to mention with your daughter now, right?
Yeah, man. We were throughout this coronavirus time period.
I'm recording, by the way. Just
no, that's fine. I just tell people, my family and I, we have a new view on life because everybody's healthy and happy in our family. So this coronavirus, COVID-19 doesn't do a whole lot to us because as long as everybody's healthy, we count it all as joy. Yeah, you've been to hell and back a few times in your life, so this is like it's a resilience spectrum in a way. I think it is. It's a spectrum of trauma, but the thing about trauma is you have to emerge from it and try to come out better then. And you also need partners to help you get through, which is why I credit my wife a whole lot. And she's instilled my children's strength comes from her. That's as you know, most men would agree.
Yeah, I'm reading about your wife, and then I just went on and looked at her Instagram account, and I was like, damn, beautiful. But more importantly, like just really impressive woman. Beauty is her ninth best quality.
As we say down south, I outpunted my coverage.
Yeah, we up north we just call it a good old mismatch.
That's exactly what it is.
Beard, probably on the Daily Show. Already been addressed.
The beard is my new look, man. I was on with Iyanla Vanzan and Tina Lifford yesterday, and the aunties were swooning over the beard.
Is that right?
You figured that out a long time ago.
Different. I mean, hair and beards on white head versus brown and black head. It matters. It's the only place where you don't know my struggle.
Yeah, that is very true. I can't empathize with that, but. This quarantine, I'm in love with my barber, so I'm hopefully we'll see him as soon as we reemerge, if we ever do.
Let me just say, and I'm just gonna, either I started earlier when you just first popped on, or now I am halfway through the book. Rarely do I read the entire book for a guest, but when it's a memoir, I try to read as much as I can. Thing is, I am not a fast reader, and I'm only halfway through, and I was thinking this might just have to be part one because I almost don't want to say anything that's coming. There's so much to cover in your life. I just want to kind of cover the first half, and if we can get through that, then just do another one.
Whatever you want to do. And one of the things I wanted to make this book what they call an easy read, and so it's my life, but I want people to, kind of pay attention to the intricacies, the ups and downs, because I want people to get some level of understanding from this book, understanding of the rural South, understanding of the poor rural South, and understanding of a plight of being a person of color in this country. I think that the most important audience for a book like yours is white people. This book, a lot of what's in this book is relatable to people who grew up black folks who grew up in the rural South. I'm sure a lot of it is relatable and they can understand it and they'll enjoy it probably as much, if not more, because they've been through a lot of this and your story is unique and interesting, as is everybody's. But I think white people should be reading this book. What do you think? I think when black folk read it, people of color, they'll get a sense of pride. But when white folk read it, I hope they get a sense of understanding. It's one thing to teach someone geometry. It's one thing to teach someone the English language, but you can't teach blackness. But we are asking you to be able to understand it and understand the culture and understand the trauma. And then maybe you can make sure that your colleagues give people the benefit of their humanity and show some level of empathy and compassion.
I think understanding is certainly one result that is going to occur, but I have a
sense of anguish at times reading this book. What do you think of that?
No, you should. The moments that we had that, I did a IG Live with Wes Moore. Wes Moore is
love Wes Moore. Know him and love him. One of the finest men I've ever met in my life.
Wes is great. And we were talking about our respective books, his being the other Wes Moore and mine being My Vanishing Country. And we were saying that when our kids grow up and read these books, we want them to look at this as a fiction, as something that is not, this can't be a reality because it's so far removed from them. And that anguish you feel is because we aren't that far removed from any of the tragedies that my family's been through. I mean, it's one generation. I'm not talking about something that was generations ago. I'm talking about something that was one generation ago. And the shoulders upon which I stand.
We met each other, I think, years ago when we were both at CNN. I don't remember exactly when we met, but we've been on TV, we've been on the radio together, but I didn't know you that well. I did not know that you were the son of a civil rights icon. I didn't know I was talking to Cleve Sellers' boy.
You're talking to Little CL. That's who you're talking to.
Little CL.
If you're in South Carolina, you're talking to Little CL. My father is my hero, and it's an interesting concept to grow up in a house where all you got to do is go to the kitchen table and your hero's sitting right there. Mm. And one of the things that I am learning in my maturation is that I'm not sure I gave my mother enough credit for her sacrifices and her struggle. While my father may have the stories that are written in the history books, my mother was the strength and the backbone behind our family. And I kind of articulate that later in the book when I'm talking about anxiety and things of that nature. And so both my parents are heroes, and the trauma that this country put both of them through is hopefully pulls on the strings and the emotional strings of the reader. I
had no idea, never heard of the Orangeburg massacre until a few days ago when I opened your book. What was that?
That's the tragedy.
What was your dad's role?
The tragedy is that you haven't heard of it.
Right.
That is the tragedy. We just remembered Kent State, which happened 50 years ago. We just memorialized that. We just memorialized Jackson State, but nobody knows about the Orangeburg massacre. My father was protesting the All-Star Bowling Alley, which is still there today. It's remnants. It's kind of fallen in. Students at South Carolina State were protesting what the history books call the last vestige of discrimination, Jim Crow's final hiding place. On February 8th, they went back to their campus after they protested and police came. They were on their campus, and I have to stress that they were on their campus, and law enforcement lined up along the embankment in front of their campus. And for 8 seconds, they fired shots into the group of students. They killed 3, Henry Smith, Samuel Hammond, and Delano Middleton. They wounded another 28. My father was shot that night, but that's not where the injustice stopped. My father also, when he was at the hospital, was arrested. They knew him to be a member of SNCC. They deemed him to be an outside agitator. They denied his bond and housed him on death row. All 9 officers who fired shots into the group of students were found not guilty. And my father was charged, tried, and convicted of rioting. He became the first and only one-man riot in the history of this country. People don't understand. They can't connect sometimes. Oh, that was just yesterday. That happened in 68. And I say, well, for my mom and dad and my brother and sister, more so than I even, you're growing up in the South and your father has a felony on his record from an injustice. A Black man with a felony. Imagine how difficult that is. He literally has the wound in his arm. And he has to live with that every day. And there are 3 young men who died. And those 3 young men died, and the entire state places that blame on your shoulders. And so I see the fact that his eyes don't pop like they used to, and his shoulders aren't as upright as they once were. And I'm angrier about that day than he is, but that's my burden to bear. That's what the Sellers name carries with it.
Yeah, the story, according to the police from the time, was that there were shots fired at them first. And I wonder if, because that's their story, that it didn't get as much attention because it was, well, we didn't start it. Why would this situation, the Orangeburg massacre, not have as much notoriety or be commemorated the way other on-campus shootings, protests like this one were?
The reason it's not commemorated the way it is at Kent State, plainly, I believe, is 1, where it happened in the deep rural South, and 2, that all of the kids shot were Black kids. The individuals who died in Kent State were all white kids. and we have a question about the value of lives in this country. And so I tried to get this story. I try to tell this story. I try to live that struggle wherever I am in the world. I try to share that story, but it's just one that's not known. And the political overlay is that the governor at the time, Governor McNair, in all likelihood, would have been the vice president of the United States, but for the incidents of this night. And so there was a great deal of covering up that happened, and they had the person they wanted to put in jail, which was my father.
So your father was a member of SNCC, as you mentioned. Your dad knew Dr. King, Julian Bond, Stokely Carmichael, the civil rights heroes, the names that you know. These were people your dad was friends with, many of which you knew. You even called them uncle. What a unique childhood you had, and I'm sure you didn't realize it then, but at what point did you realize that your dad was a civil rights icon?
I didn't realize it at the time, I'm sure, because he was just dad. But, when I was 4 years old, I was the campaign baby for Jesse Jackson. Every time you saw Jesse, you would see me in those little red overalls and those white hard-bottom shoes. My son, one of my twins, is named Stokely, after Stokely Carmichael. I tell people often that I much rather be a Julian Bond than Barack Obama, and that I love Barack. That doesn't mean that per se, but Julian does come from this element of struggle, which I directly relate to. And I know his efforts and I know his toils in the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee. And so I am very blessed and very lucky. And I think I didn't realize it until third grade is when I finally realized that my father was a true hero.
So I really enjoyed just reading about anybody's childhood, especially growing up. I guess anywhere. I love reading about people's childhood, but I don't know much about rural South Carolina. Tell me about what it was like to grow up in this town and realizing that at the time you were born in 1984. So this town was being hollowed out, or was hollowed out in terms of manufacturing and the economy by the time you were coming of age. Is that fair to say?
It was being hollowed out. And by the early 90s, what we once knew was gone. And, when you travel through these towns in the South, you would have a 5 and dime store, a bakery, appliance store, a record store, a Chinese food shop, all of these things in the area. And it wasn't long thereafter that all of that stuff became boarded up. But we didn't know that what we didn't have. During the summers, I tried it. I wasn't successful at it. Didn't last, but I picked watermelons and melons. I wasn't built like that. I'm too frail, as you know, to be out there tossing watermelons. Some things you're not built for, you learn early on. We did things like break into the college basketball gym to hoop. But
hold on. When you said, when you wrote about that you only lasted like a couple hours in the field throwing, I think, watermelons or whatever it was, I thought to myself, I wonder if he thought about the people who were forced to do that, his ancestors, because, you think about when you're doing hard manual labor, you think about what it might have been like for somebody else. But imagine being out there and not even earning any money and having all of the horror that came with it. How did you think about that then? You only lasted a couple hours?
I did not think about it then, but I will tell you that behind our home, we live on about 24 acres, we had a cotton field. And during the winter, we would rotate crops. So it would be cotton, it would be soybeans, corn. And whenever the cotton would come, you would see the cotton gin roll through. And the cotton gin is the most inefficient piece of farm equipment ever. It leaves so much cotton out there. It just leaves so much cotton. But when you go and you pick it up by hand, first of all, you realize it's really thorny. And how the hell did people do this? It was really thorny. And then it has a seed on the inside that you have to peel back the cotton and take the seed out. And you literally just processed that there were women who had to bend over, arch their back all day, and they picked 400 pounds of this stuff that's light as a feather in this heat with snakes. And just, it was growing up through that part of the South. It definitely, you thought about it often. When I was picking those melons, though, I just thought about getting home. I wasn't having any type of historical perspective.
Right. Also, I never heard of is it no-see-ums? The bugs that you can't.
No-see-ums, yeah. Those are nests.
No-see-ums.
Yeah. You never heard of those before?
I don't think I've ever heard. I mean, gnats, yeah, but I don't know. They seem particular to part of the country or climate that I wasn't familiar with because
they are. I mean, they are pests, true and utter pests, and so we have a lot of those things that are true to from the people to the animals to the culture to the crop that are ours in the Black Belt of the South.
What's it like now in 2020, the Black Belt of the South? And I didn't realize the Black Belt referenced the rich arable soil. I actually thought it was just where Black people lived, and it was a reference to politics. Like, this is where you have to go, like the Bible Belt. This is where you have to go to get these people on board, or this is mostly, Black rural communities.
Yeah, no. So, and I try to give this is not a partisan book, as you probably realize. It does have politics, but it's not a partisan book. And I tried to give some context and perspective, that being one of them. And you asked a good question. What is it like now? And right now, my home in Denmark, it's in the middle of a food desert, like it was when we grew up. And food deserts, for those who don't know, are when you can't travel 2, 3, 4 miles and get healthy food alternatives of fresh fruits and vegetables. Our hospital just closed, so we have an urgent care facility that was just built, but for about a decade, we didn't have a hospital. The urgent care facility if you have a heart attack, you'll probably still die. But at least you have a place to go and get bandaged if you break your leg. We have insanely high concentrations of pollutants in our water. So our water, it's still a question of whether or not it's potable or suitable to drink. We live along what's called the corridor of shame. So kids go to school where their heating and air don't work. Their infrastructure is falling apart. The little people, as I call them, our primary school, they go to school in trailers. And so when it rains, they have to walk through the mud. That's the condition now. And it's the condition in 2020, which is a tragedy.
South Carolina is a really interesting state for a lot of reasons, I suppose, mainly because of its history. And you document a little bit of that in the book, mostly as it relates to your childhood and to your life. But you also were doing better than at least some of your friends in high school. Talk to me about the other side of the tracks.
Yeah, I actually do admit that I was more than blessed. The reason being is because both of my parents were educators, and we had so many opportunities, and I was a part of what they called, it's a village to raise a child. And on my side of the tracks, as we, even in small towns, you have tracks. There may not have been a whole lot of opportunity, but there was some. And we were always very cognizant of how blessed we were, which is why our home was always open to so many. In the book, you never realize that people you grow up with or friends actually become characters in your life. And Pop is that character that sticks out more than most. And Pop is still a friend today. He just got laid off not long ago. So we're kind of down about that, but as is most of the world right now.
I was really the writing about him. You write about him a lot in the first half of the book, and it was very interesting to hear about him. And one thing is that he's a lot older than you, but yet you guys were good friends. I mean, a lot older for playmates, I guess. He's like 6 years older than you, but you guys went everywhere together. And what I think is most interesting is that your family basically took him in when his dad tragically died in a car accident. And what it made me think is, the more affluent, I don't know if this is, ethnic, but the more affluent one becomes, the less likely, I'm just going to generalize, they are to take somebody in. The more poverty that someone deals with, the more likely they are to take another child in. And that's weird because if you don't have much, then you don't have much to share. I mean, you don't have enough food to share. Rich people could be we could be taking in all kinds of people, refugees and all kinds, and we'd all be fine, but we don't. What is it about, people living in poverty, black or white, that has you taken other kids in?
Well, my mother and father, they knew we were fortunate enough to have opportunity and blessings. And so Pop was our brother. Now, Pop's always been my brother. Whenever I was having any issues, Pop's always been there for me. And the unique part about Pop is I talk about our relationship now as we're maturing. And you may hear a twin in the background. I have 16-month-old twins, so we're just going to have to live through that, Pete. So that's
all right. I mean, I think you should have to bring them on camera if they're going to be making noise, but go ahead.
But Pop is a unique character because Pop represents so many. Pop represents those voices that are forgotten. And he's been screaming out so long for help. And my parents attempted to give him as much help as possible. I've attempted to give him as much help as possible. And it's just a unique relationship. It's a story that isn't yet completed yet. There's no conclusion to the story of Pop, but he's hardworking. He's from the dirt. He's from the soil. And he's a part of my family.
Yeah, and he obviously had a much different path than you did, and you talk intimately about your own, challenges and struggles with the friendship, about how you guys kind of went in different directions and so on. And I really appreciated that in the book. When it got to the chapter about before I get to college, your friend Gerald in high school,
Jared,
meet.
Jared's still my best friend today. He's a humbling force. Let's say that.
Well, you say that because it's interesting that the day you met him at a new, you were at a new school,
yeah.
And the moment you walk in, tall with an afro, wearing whatever you were wearing, he just lays into you, and it was fascinating because I had a similar experience in college with a bunch of black guys, and I became friends. It was it resonated, that part. Explain though what that is, the snapping. And as you call it, jiving.
Call it in New York? What you call it up north?
What do we call it? I think we just called it snapping.
Snapping, yeah. We call it jiving down here.
We white people didn't have a name for it.
You didn't.
We didn't do it as much. Black people. When I went to college, and I was roommates with this black guy, and therefore became friends with his friend group, which were all black, I quickly realized what was happening. I was a comedian. I was a funny guy in high school, but I quickly realized, this is a different kind of humor where it was ruthless, brutal, and mean, but hilarious. And some people could take it and some people can't. And you write about that in the book. And I've always wanted to, I'm sure a lot of people talk about that, but I've always wanted someone to write intimately about that cultural thing. Because I'm not saying it's specific only to black people, but that's where I learned it. What is it?
I will tell you that is one of the pieces of the book that I enjoyed writing the most, because I just harken back to the days, and some of the jokes I couldn't put in the book.
I'm sure not. Yeah,
it would have taken it to another level. But growing up, sitting around the B lunch table, we would sit there, and either somebody would make a beat and we'd start rapping, and we were all god awful rappers, or we would just be dissing each other, jiving each other, and it built this quick wit that I actually use on TV. I use in the courtroom now. I use as a politician now. It built this thicker skin, so you're not an emotional creature that needs a safe space per se when somebody is talking trash about you. Because in this new age of social media, we got a lot of people with a lot of opinions, and a lot of them hide behind cameras. And so,
I looked up some of the criticism of you, and the name you're most commonly called, especially by like hardcore progressives, is Bakari Sellout. Bakari Sellout.
Yeah. If you have a rose in your name, or you were a very, very left-leaning person who just got into politics around 2016 with Bernie Sanders, you have a lot of names for Bakari Sellers, and let's just leave it at that. But listen, I can give it back to the best of them. And me and Jared, we would sit in a room and we would just go back and forth with each other, and nothing was off. I mean, your mom wasn't off limits. Nothing was off limits. And it was our culture. It was a way that we dealt with various things. It was an outlet. And when you were somebody like myself, who wasn't the biggest, who was a new kid, if I could take it and give it back, it made me become more accepted, and more a part of that crew and crowd, and build friendships. And so it's a mechanism of coping, to say the least.
Yeah, I loved reading about that. It was fascinating.
You're the first person who's actually pointed that out, so that's pretty dope, because that's one of my favorite. That's one of my favorite pieces of the book.
Well, I think how you deal with those types of jokes, which are really masked insults, is a really important thing in somebody's life, because you can either let it hurt you, or let it make you angry. There's all kinds of different ways that you take it, but you chose to laugh along with them, which is the very best thing you can do. And as a comic, sitting at the table with the best comedians in the world, it's the same thing, where it doesn't matter how mean or awful your joke is. The most important thing is that it's funny, and then you can laugh along with it. Then you're going to be You're going to be in.
That's correct. And so taking the joke is almost just as important as giving it. And that is what that portion of the book talks about.
Because I knew I was going to interview you, and I was running out of time, I was like, let me just skip the chapter
or part 3 about, which is titled School Days, the Making of a Morehouse Man, to get to your time in office and beyond. But I was like, nah, I can't skip it. I can't skip any of this. I want to read it. And I'm so glad that I did, because like a lot of other things I'm not familiar with, I'm not at all familiar with historically black colleges and universities. I know very little about them. And I guess I didn't know that Morehouse was all men, but I certainly didn't know a lot of these traditions that you explain and the history of it and the alumni. Your older brother is what? How many years older?
He was born in 76, so 8.
So he went to Morehouse before you. So your family was, very familiar with it. But what a fascinating institution that is. Tell me a little bit about that school and your experience there. So first, I love this chapter.
First, I went to school when I was 16 years old. Many people don't know that.
You started college at 16, which is crazy.
I started college at 16 years old with my snake, Hercules, in tow.
Yeah, what the fuck? Why did you? That really gave me pause. You had a 4-foot boa.
Ball
python. There's no difference to most of us. It's a 4-foot snake. I don't really care. Most of us don't give a shit about the species. And why? Why did you have that? Number one. Number two, why did you bring it to college knowing it was against the rules? And I have a lot of other follow-ups. We should spend an hour on this.
The answer to the question why is I was 16. And to me at 16, it made a whole lot of sense. I got the snake when I was about 9 or 10.
Why?
Because I just wanted one. I used to love animals, but I used to think I was going to be a veterinarian, which would have made for a much less interesting book. But my allergies are so god awful that I can't be. You don't want to go to your vet and he's like popping Zyrtec and his eyes are swollen.
Yeah.
I look like this, when my eyes get puffy. And so I took my ball python. Jared didn't care. Jared was my roommate from high school to college. I thought it was going to be a hit to the girls. It was not.
That's where you thought. Like, I was trying to figure there's got to be some kind of important reason.
It was working, because all the girls, at the festivals and things, they knew I was the kid with the snake. And so everybody, you take it off your neck and you let them hold it. They come and they want to talk to you. It didn't work that way in college. You learn, you live and you learn. And so, that the most amazing thing about it, though, is that at 16 years old, with a college ID in Atlanta, Georgia, you could get into anywhere. So here I was at 16 years old. We were in Buckhead. We were partying with everybody. You're in there with 22, 23, 30-year-old grown people. You're in the line at Club Visions. It's just an amazing, amazing experience. Morehouse, though, is unlike any other HBCU in the country.
Hold on one second before you go to Morehouse. You have a sentence in the book that says about your roommate, Jerry. Jerry had his TV. I had my snake. I was like, that's not the same. It's not the same. They're not. You can't.
You bring certain things to the partnership, man.
All right. So you're at Morehouse. Go ahead. It's not like other
institutions, man. Morehouse is in the Atlanta University Center. So although we're 3,000 all male across the street, you have Spelman. 3,000 all female. You have Clark Atlanta, which is 10-to-1 female to male ratio. But it's unique for our leadership structure. It's unique for the individuals who graduated from Morehouse: Spike Lee, Samuel L. Jackson, Julian Bond, Martin Luther King Jr., Edwin Moses. The list goes on and on and on. John David Washington. And so what is that noise?
That's your computer. I learned in your book that Julian Bond and John Lewis, two of my heroes.
So I'm going to get in trouble about this part.
What?
I'm going to get in trouble about that part. I do feel.
Well, that they had a little bit of beef.
They had beef. Yeah.
Why will you get in trouble? Sadly, we lost Julian Bond, but John Lewis?
I don't think that many people know that story. And I in telling the whole truth, I love Julian, and I firmly believe what I stated, that if the campaign would have been run more tastefully, that Julian Bond would have been the congressman from that district and not John Lewis.
I'm proud to have interviewed both those guys, and both of them. Julian Bond a bunch of times, and John Lewis just once. I've been pursuing him for a year, but now it's he's ill, so he's not going to do it.
Those two, it's a question of whether or not they've ever made up. They say they have, but I don't know how genuine that is.
So I thought it was interesting to hear about like some of the traditions with Morehouse and what it set out to do for young black men and so on. Maybe you could talk a little bit about the ideals there, but also I thought it's always interesting. I mean, how many times have I heard and even said, black folks are not a monolith? Okay, we got it. But it's interesting to see, I mean, a lot of people don't have it, but it's interesting to see that on that campus you describe the different groups within black men alone.
Yes.
Talk to me a little bit about Morehouse as, the traditions. Y'all have to wear a uniform, but yet you're individuals or cliques, and there's even a gay group of students at Morehouse.
I mean, and you're right. I mean, it was so diverse. And that's what I tell people that I went to an historically black all-male college, and they're like, what? And I'm like, it was probably the most diverse place you'll ever be in your life.
How? We
had people from all around the world. We had people of different political persuasions, different sexual orientations, different geographies, which brought their own little flavor. I talk about the clothing in the book and what the guys from the different parts of the country wore. But we all came together, and Morehouse was unique because it took, whatever school you graduated from, usually the top tier of black male when that graduating class came down to Morehouse College, and then we were all. So you looked around and you had the best from all of these different parts of the country together. And so it gives you, we always say that Morehouse places a crown above your head that you must grow into. And that's the type of leadership characteristics. I talk about Samuel L. Jackson in the books and things people didn't know about Samuel L. Jackson, his history at the school, and his history with Dr. King. And so for me, it was just giving people that peek into what it means to go to an HBCU, I thought was important.
Yeah, it was really very interesting to me. Probably, like I said, that was the chapter I was going to skip. Not that I wanted to, but I was running out of time, and I'm so glad that I didn't skip it.
Fascinated that you read the book. A lot of interviews, people don't even take time to read the book. So let me just say thank you for that. Thank you for taking time to something that I put my heart into, for turning the pages and reading it in preparation.
Well, when I saw that you had written a book and that it was a memoir, I always wanted to know you more. I always wanted to be better friends with you, but that was hard to do because we weren't in the same place. We weren't in the same circles. How close can you get to somebody that you only talk to on the radio or might bump into every once in a great while?
Will we ever see each other again? Will we ever be in the same place again?
Now our relationship will be strictly Zoomly. But I of course I wanted to get the book. I wanted to read the book, but like I said earlier, I think it's a responsibility for someone like me to read a book like yours and to share it with people because of how different your life was than mine, and yet how relatable it all is as well. So that's why I read, and I'm almost done with it, and I cannot wait to finish it, and we'll do part 2. But a few more minutes on part 1 if we can, because, after Morehouse, where you accomplished a lot at Morehouse, and I don't want to give too much away because I want people to read the book, but with student government and with other relationships, you learned a lot. You obviously built a huge network, but you then went and decided you were going to run for the South Carolina State House, which is a preposterously ambitious thing to do. You're way too young. You're not qualified. And the guy that you were trying to beat had been there for 474 years. Where did you get that idea that you could actually do that?
I thought I could change the world. And coming from a family, my mom and dad would always say you could be anything in the world, just be a change agent. Looking up to people like Julian Bond, who was very young when he got seated in the South Carolina State Senate. In the Georgia State Senate. I knew that my community wasn't even growing stagnantly, it was declining. And the person who'd been representing them for 24 years, he was 82 years old. He wasn't doing a good job anymore. And so if not me, then who? And if not now, then when? And so I had the audacity to run for office. And that was a very, very tough uphill battle. Everybody who voted for me said, I don't think you're going to win, but I voted for you anyway. It just happened to be 55% of the vote.
And you did win. I hear one of the twins, that's Sadie or Stokely?
This is Sadie. Come here. Say hey to Uncle Pete.
Oh, wow. Oh my goodness. Is that,
yeah.
It's funny. You write about her when she came out, right?
Mm-hmm.
And you say a lot of babies are homely. And you just admit it. And both mine were. They would look like aliens. But you said, but I got to be honest, she was not, because she had these big brown eyes, and I see it now.
Yeah.
I see it now.
Sadie on September 1st.
People got to watch it. I got to put this video out now, make sure everybody gets to see that, or at least a still shot. Go ahead.
September 1st, Sadie had a liver transplant.
I read about this.
And she hears me talking about it now, and she's running up smiling. She had a liver transplant, and she's thriving. She's doing so well. And so, she's so strong. For 93 days, just imagine, for 93 days, every single day, you're watching your child die. That's what it's like when you're on a transplant waiting list, a system that's broken. We were fortunate enough, she was given the gift of life. And we are forever grateful to that donor family and that family that gave so much.
Yeah, I want to hear more about that and your wife and part two. But before, I know you got a crazy day of interviews. I want to let you go, but I do want to ask you just about current events. Specifically, I wanted to ask you about South Carolina politics and Joe Biden. I think it's my understanding. I want to just lay this out real quick and then have you tell me it's wrong or punch holes in it or say there's some truth to it. But there's a lot of concern about Joe Biden not being a strong enough candidate to beat Donald Trump or not being the best choice. And specifically as it relates to black folks and racial injustice and so on, that he has a sordid past and that he is not the best person for black Americans. My understanding is that black folks generally understand that, but they think certainly older black folks who have been in politics for a long time, that he has the best chance to win, and they can't possibly take a chance on somebody who doesn't have the best chance to win because of how terrible Donald Trump is. What is the understanding? How did he win South Carolina with your friend Jim Clyburn's endorsement? You interned in his office and write all about that. Tell me about South Carolina, James Clyburn, his endorsement, and why Joe Biden has got so much support, especially amongst older black folks down south.
Because black folk have worked extremely hard and gone through so much to reach any semblance of success in the realm of politics that, it's like we'd be damned if we risk or take a flyer on losing any of those things. And so you're not going to take a chance on an unproven commodity. Bernie Sanders ran on some amazing ideas, but people would look and see that, one, there wasn't any trust or familiarity with that. An individual's been elected for 40 years. And the question is, we haven't seen these big ideas come to fruition through your hand. And there was the familiarity with Joe Biden, not just had he been in office forever, but, he has a vacation home in South Carolina. He's very well known in South Carolina. He has friends and relationships and family there. But even more importantly, he was the vice president for the first black president of the history of the United States. In most black churches, it's always a picture of Black Jesus, Dr. King, and it was Ben Carson, but we took Ben Carson down and put Barack Obama up. And so, you go through all of these things and you realize that I would always tell people after New Hampshire and Iowa, and they were crowning a new front runner, I said, be patient because black folk haven't voted yet. And a lot of that has to do with a fear of losing the little bit that we've acquired in this country. And people call it incrementalism. People say that it's not progressive. And I say that it's very practical. And there was this belief of trust and practicality with Joe Biden, and black women rock with Joe Biden. And if black women rock with Joe Biden, the person who wins the Democratic nomination is going to be decided by my mama and her friends, period. And so they all supported him. And that's where you are. And now they want a black female to be vice president, and we'll see how that ticket plays out.
How important do you think that is?
I think it's very important. I think it's very important for the energy, because people are like, oh, black people are going to vote for you anyway. That is true. However, the question is whether or not these same black folk are going to go out and get their neighbor to vote for you, if they're going to donate, if they're going to knock on doors, if they're going to be active. And so somebody like a Kamala Harris would be very important to the ticket. Or Val Demings or Marcia Fudge. But I think that would be a value-added asset to the ticket.
Great to see your face, man. I'm going to let you go just because I know you got a crazy day. I'm really excited for you and this book. It's a crazy time that we're in, and I'm sure that when you were working on this book, you didn't think that it would be released during a pandemic, but it's so important to be reminded, or learn, I should say, for the first time, so many of the things that you write about. My Vanishing Country, a memoir, or is it memoir? I always say
It's
I used to say
it's memoir. Memoir. No, I have no idea.
memoir.
Memoir.
That's how you should sell it the rest of the time, just to get people's reactions. Yes, just talk normal and then just hit that word French. Yeah, so I decided to write a memoir and just watch everybody like, what the fuck is wrong? Congratulations.
Can I say thank you for your friendship? Thank you for your voice, using your platform all the time. And thank you for giving me an opportunity, even with all of these crazy sounds we have going on in my twins. At least my son is asleep. But thank you for...
Thank you, man. No, you're a big deal. You're a big CNN guy. You got this book. You got all these connections, and for you to hang out with me, I appreciate it. I know you later on you're hanging out with Kamala Harris and Tiffany Cross and Politics and Prose. So you doing my podcast today. But I say, and will any of them offer you part 2, Era?
No,
because I want to get
part 2. But part 2, we have to do it in person. So there we have it.
Well, I don't know if that's ever going to happen, and I want to keep promoting the book. We'll talk about when off the air, because I'll talk to you about anything, anytime. I'm so happy that things are going better with your daughter's health and your wife and your whole family. It's so great to get to know you through the book. Thank you for joining me, pal.
Thank you so much, brother. Have a good day, man.
You too. All right, Bakari Sellers, the book, My Vanishing Country, a memoir. I'm telling you, I can't put it down. I'm going to finish it, and we'll do part 2. But right now, we got to get to John Avlon, who's on Twitter at John Avlon. He's a CNN contributor and anchor and former editor-in-chief of the Daily Beast, a very good friend of mine. We had a great conversation about work-life balance and how the pandemic has changed things for all of us. But mostly we talked about politics, as we usually do. Always love talking with John. He is great on the air and super smart. Don't always agree with everything that John says, but I love talking to him. Hard to argue with him. But I'd love to hear anything that you have, any argument that you have for me or any of my guests. As long as it's made respectful, I absolutely welcome it and love it. So bring it. Here now, my conversation. It's been far too long. My old friend and regular guest at John Avlon.
Hello.
Yeah.
All right. Oh, that's nice.
All right, I finally got him back. Here he is, my old friend, my good friend, John Avlon, on Twitter at John Avlon. Read all his articles at CNN, watch his reality checks. John, welcome back.
Hey, man.
Haven't talked to you in a long time. I miss you.
I miss you, too. How's life up in Rockland?
We are doing pretty well, actually. We're hanging in there. We are... adapting and really enjoying our family time. How about you guys? I bet you're enjoying your family. You work so much, and now you get to be with them.
No, look, there are silver linings in this situation for sure. And that's the biggest one. I mean, as you know, I basically, we all work hard and relatively nonstop, but this has been certainly the longest stretch of time we've all been together as a family. And even though obviously there are challenges balancing work and life, and Margaret's filming Firing Line from the living room, and I'm doing my reality checks for CNN from the living room, it's actually been amazing. And our kids are young enough where they're just psyched to have us around, which is not, I gather, not a given. And I'm actually working on an essay on that I'm going to publish the next week or two. I'm tentatively calling it sort of less fun, more joy, but it's about the kind of the lessons of COVID and how we spend I think a lot of time, as busy people doing busy things. And, as you get older, and especially as you're a parent, you trade fun, but you get back joy, and that's infinitely better.
Yeah, I think that's really well said, but I've said it much simpler in that kind of, most people have kids in their maybe late 20s, early 30s, maybe late 30s. But at any time that you're having kids, you're also kind of in the peak of your career. So the time when your kids want you to be with them, when you want to be with your kids, I'm speaking for myself, when they're young and they're developing, that's the time when you need to also be working the most on your career, no matter what industry or what job you have. And it kind of, I don't know. I wanted to hack that system. I wanted to hack that idea.
Look, that is kind of the classic contradiction that everybody faces. And, when we saw it, I saw it with my dad, and we see it with our parents and then in our own lives. I mean, I had kids slightly later, mid to late 30s. Actually, I was 40. And in part, that was because I was trying to build kind of a non-traditional career that required, I just wanted to make sure that I didn't feel like I'd created the kind of sacrifices in terms of building the life I wanted to live that ended up coming out of my kids or the places where I wanted to grow and go.
You were editor-in-chief of the Daily Beast, and you could have done that job, a prestigious job, for the rest of your career. But I also felt like when we would talk during that time in our more personal conversations, I would even kind of say to you, but like, dude, you can't even if you have a vacation, you have to be on call. You can't really ever unplug when you're editor-in-chief of a major outlet like that.
And not, especially one that is that ambitious and aggressive, but lean. So really, with that kind of a small staff, a lean team, there's just not. First of all, you want to lead by example, and I always tried to make sure I was the first one in and one of the last people out. Not everyone has that point of view, but I felt that was important, and that's exactly right. And one of the main reasons that I decided, like when Tina Brown left and we were in the process of selling Newsweek and the Beast's future seemed to be very much up in the air. I was executive editor and, Jack was 3 weeks old when I took over. And so that was a very big deal in terms of the time on task it took. And I was not around a lot. And when Jack was around 4.5, he turned to me and he just sort of said in passing, I don't know if it was one night or one morning, but he said, "Dad, I don't see you enough." Oh. And that was a huge deal for me. And that had a lot to do with the decisions I made. And I love seeing it and I love being on. I've always gotten energy from being on air. Yeah. And all of a sudden an opportunity came up and it just seemed like the right thing to do for my family and for me. And so, 100%. But this is a totally different thing where we're able to really be together day in and day out. And look, with everything in life, every instinct in my being, and I think a lot of, reporters and columnists, particularly early on, this is a major story of our time, but it's a weird one to the extent that even if, as a journalist, you could travel, the things you'd normally do to get a story, you really couldn't, certainly not safely, not only for yourself, but more importantly for people in your family and your extended family.
Great point.
And so, there's been this surreal aspect to it where we're doing everything from a distance, but you try to figure out to do what's best you can and what's in your wheelhouse where you can add real value. My focus at the end of the day is always on politics and depolarization, and we do have a presidential election happening. By all accounts. So, it's been a good time to finish some big projects, and I came up with you'll love my list of personal quarantine COVID goals. I would just to make sure you want to make sure you're working on the big stuff that matters to you.
Wait, hold on a second. Your personal quarantine goals, are any of them not career or work related? Are you going to finish that treehouse, John Avlon? What is there anything? Are you? You're writing the book, but that doesn't count. That's work.
It is, but it's a different kind of work. It's like a crafting thing as opposed to a. But no, absolutely. I think that's one of the things. Came up with a bunch of books that I'd wanted to read that I'd never been able to get around to, a bunch of movies, a bunch of things with the kids, just personal, just little personal projects you never have time for. This is a good time, assuming that you're lucky enough to stay healthy and to take up some of those projects. And that's, that's an example of sort of finding the silver lining in all this.
So, do you and your wife, Margaret Hoover, do you fight over a camera? Is there one camera in the living room and you're both on TV and I got to use the camera right now? No, it's my turn to use the camera right now.
She tapes her show. Theoretically, if there was she's got guests. So theoretically, if we needed the camera at the same time,
you're in the car.
That would be a challenge. Yeah.
John's out in the car, the driveway.
I'm in the driveway, baby. But so far it's worked fine. And Firing Line has been doing amazingly well. Had some just amazing, great guests, and because she just decided, like, despite all this, she can't work out of the studio, but she was going to plow on, and it's done really, really well for PBS. And most of it, she just had Susan Rice on, who made some news about being open to be Biden's VP, and she's had a lot of doctors and scientists and really good stuff.
Oh, wow. I hadn't even heard her name floated. Susan Rice.
Mm-hmm.
Huh. That's interesting. Do you have any suggestions as to who you think Joe Biden should pick or will pick, John Avlon?
One column I'm going to be working on, and I've got, what I'm trying to do is do more, make sure I've got time for, like, the big essays that you don't have time for in the craziness of life,
right.
But a relatively quick piece that I want to do is, I think it gets floated, and there are some constitutional concerns, but I don't think they should preoccupy people. I think Biden, of all candidates, should be announcing his cabinet. It should be more than a VP. I think he needs to put a team on the field. And look, there are arguments you can make against it. Some are political. Oh, you've got 10, opposition research targets instead of 1 or 2.
Right. That's what I was thinking.
Okay, fine. The other one is, well, it could be seen as violating some provisions about, benefiting from elections, and sort of obscure provisions that I don't think should hold people back. And there are ways around that. You can also say, here are the people who are going to be in my transition team with senior positions in any administration. But I think, what Biden needs to do is almost as is done in a parliamentary election, put forward a shadow cabinet and say, look, this is what the government is going to look like. It's going to be, the contrast is going to be competence and excellence and a professional, nonpartisan nature. And we're going to make government work again. We're going to make America work again. And to not simply, weight it towards pleasing the base, but really try to put a team on the field that can, as much as humanly possible, unite America. I just think that's the play that he, above all people, should make.
The thing that that's a really interesting suggestion. I've heard a couple of other people that I also.
It's not a wholly original idea, but I think you could put out names out there too.
Yeah, for sure. The thing that I worry the most about is the legitimacy of this November election, given the fact that the president wants to let the prestigious, most highly approved agency into all of government, the United States Post Office, to run out of money, thus making it more difficult to mail ballots to people, much less send them back in, the voter suppression efforts, and not to mention just the fact that the pandemic could be back in a strong and horrible way around that time. And so how concerned are you, John, about the legitimacy of the election?
Look, I think you got to be very careful to not. You got to prepare. You've got to prepare for the worst, but assume the best. And I don't think it's helpful to think that the president is going to or has the power to fundamentally derail our elections. The president can't suspend an election, for example. Even if he would want to. That said, there are a lot of rocks in the water ahead, and you just named some of them. The problems with the post office and the president, I think, are probably deeper than a desire to make mail-in voting more difficult. Although certainly he has said that. He gave away the ghost and said it because he thought he would be disadvantaged. And by the way, there's not a lot of evidence to suggest that's true, because the people who would be most likely to vote by mail in this context are probably older people who, while Biden is much more competitive with them than Democrats we've seen recently, technically that should be part of Trump's base. So I don't even think that incredibly cynical reason actually holds water. But I think, there are a couple things you got to watch out for. One is obviously if we have a second impact of a pandemic, how is that handled? Will there be absentee ballots and insufficient mail-in voting? How will those votes be counted? Keeping in mind that, in states that have all mail, you sometimes very often don't have a winner that night. It takes a couple of days. Right. I don't think nearly enough has been done to secure the infrastructure of our elections. I mean, the president obviously has, basically suborned, foreign interference in elections in the case of Ukraine, trying to get them to get involved in an investigation against the person he didn't want to run against, who was Joe Biden. And you know, we'll see variations on the things we saw in 2016. It might not just be Russia. There'll be a number of different countries trying to, provide disinformation, and then obviously a very dirty campaign based a lot on demonstrable lies, and there'll be efforts at voter suppression, which don't necessarily need to be just bureaucratic roadblocks, although those happen often always too. They can be just efforts to increase cynicism or apathy or confusion. So I think we all just, as Americans beyond party, just need to be incredibly wide-eyed about the fact that we need our elections to have integrity. We need them to proceed in a way that allows a maximum number of people to vote, that there are people who want to stop that, and to just realize that this is a real jump ball moment in the history of our republic, and I think we just got to be real wide-eyed about what we're heading into, but without slipping into conspiracy theories.
Well, I'm glad you mentioned that, because you wrote Wingnuts years ago now, and
10 years ago.
Rebooted it not too long ago. And I mean, I've been beating that drum for a long time. I've been really concerned about the fringe, once thought of as fringe conspiracy theories, and how much ground they were gaining being in the media, and where I was working at the time and just paying attention to the media. I would see how popular these theories were, and I would hear from listeners so often. And now the president of the United States is one of the leading conspiracy theorists, and I've been talking about it a lot. And with the pandemic, coinciding with anti-vax movement, because the solution to this is a vaccine, it's tailor-made for these conspiracy theorists in so many ways. And how concerned are you with the role that they are playing right now, and how many kind of ordinary average Americans are buying into these slick YouTube videos and starting to just not trust anybody?
So as you say, this is a problem that's been percolating for a long time. And what I don't think we saw heading into 2016 is how much social media, because we usually see sort of the upside of these technological innovations, but how much it was sort of tailor-made to disinformation campaigns. The Russians saw that much more clearly and early on, for example, than we did. What I certainly didn't anticipate during Wingnuts is, while you saw asymmetric polarization, while you saw a lot of these various strains, no pun intended, of conspiracy theories like the anti-vaxxer movement, and when I was running the Daily Beast, we published some of the first big articles about the anti-vaxxer movement early on, because it gets down to these basic conflicts about science. Yeah. And I think it shows you how important it is to have a fact-based debate, that we need, Isaac Asimov had a great line about how, my ignorance is not as good as your knowledge. There's not good people can disagree, but there is such a thing as science and facts and math and truth, which doesn't mean anyone's infallible, but these merchants of doubt and that process of seeding doubt and proliferating conspiracy theories, we can recognize, and we need to call out quickly. What I didn't anticipate, what I don't think anyone could have anticipated given the history of our country, is that we would have a president who becomes a conspiracy theorist in chief, who uses the bully pulpit to spread disinformation and misinformation. And I've written many columns about this, and I've done many reality checks about this. But sad to say, that's what we have. And rebuilding these breaches of trust is going to take a long time, because we've never had anyone in the Oval Office have such sort of disregard for the truth, for facts, for science. We've had big disagreements and debates, and people are, imperfect, and they make mistakes. And this goes well beyond that. And I mean, already the stuff we're seeing in the context of this campaign, you see, outright cults and conspiracy theories being given credence from an incumbent president and his campaign. And that's a real problem when you're dealing with a pandemic, because pandemics, obviously, guess what? Don't care about partisan politics. That's one of the things that makes this all so stupid. That said,
in a way, though, I would argue you're right. Obviously, pandemics don't care about partisan politics, but the fact of the matter is, it's been a lot more damaging, a lot more loss of life in blue states where there's big cities, New Orleans, Detroit, New York City, California, and there does seem to be a partisan divide over giving aid to those states. Am I reading that wrong? Maybe I'm not paying close enough attention.
No. And I did a reality check about this a little while ago, and it explodes. And it gives us the opportunity to explode a number of different fictions. One of which is, and Senator Moynihan used to do this. So-called blue states, particularly New York, actually give more to the federal government than we get. Where so-called red states like Kentucky or Mississippi get much more than they give. That said, you've heard me talk about this in the context even of my first, my last book, Washington's Farewell. The deepest divides in America aren't red state, blue state. They're not Democrat, Republican. They're urban versus rural. The thing about pandemics is that they tend to begin in cities where people are densely populated. That's where there's a lot of travel and all that stuff. But they tend to also move from the coast in the case of the 1918 Spanish influenza into the heart of the country, and they hit different regions at different times, and that's why even though these things historically have faded in the summer and come back in the fall, to act like any region is immune is totally wrong. At the same time, it's also totally wrong acting like every region is going to have the same level of challenge and threat. It's not. So what Andrew Cuomo's done in New York State, I think, makes a lot of sense, where you break up a big state into regions and you open up different regions at different places and you test and you make sure you're on top of it. The problem is we're in a place where we've got some of the most influential people in the country, and in a cult-like environment where hyperpartisanship has really distorted people's ability to think, taking sort of positions that are at odds with science. And that's not good. We need to be able to agree as a republic on basic facts and science. That doesn't mean we can't have great disagreements about all sorts of other stuff. But if science becomes partisan, we got a real problem. And that's where we got to work our way back from.
I wonder what you think about the idea of, we've talked a lot about this. You've written so much about America and its place in the world, and America and exceptionalism. There's been a lot of interesting think pieces, which are hard to convince you, but a lot easier to convince me that we are really on the decline in terms of, where we stand in the world. And now it seems like a better example of that than ever, because what the pandemic lays bare are the huge, massive holes in our social safety net, especially as it goes to healthcare. And, you look at the rest of the world and they overwhelmingly seem to be handling it a lot better, and almost all of them with better leadership, save maybe Brazil. But what do you think about, American exceptionalism being on decline as being represented by our inability to handle this horrible, horrible situation?
Okay, so Ann Applebaum wrote a great column about this, and I do think that one of the long-term impacts of our country dealing with COVID, and the fact that it has been worse here than in many other countries, not all, is a self-inflicted wound that's been compounded by the administration, which has tried to sort of undermine the idea of competent government, right? What sometimes is called the administrative state. But basically, you've got nonpartisan experts who are in place who aren't, pursuing partisan agendas on any given administration, that we haven't invested in our safety net the way many other countries have. And that in public health is a really good example of one of those things that requires investment, it requires planning. And we did a terrible job coming out of the gate, the administration did, because it didn't have adequate testing, because the president wasn't taking it seriously, because he didn't take it seriously until the stock market started being impacted. So we lost a lot of precious time. Now, that said, look, Iran has a much worse problem than we do. South Korea's done better. Russia, we had a lot of glowing headlines about their response. Now, predictably, we see a lot of that's about as thin as a press release. I don't think we have a clue what the real numbers and real dynamics are in China, but certainly, authoritarian governments can act with greater swiftness. That doesn't mean they're anything worth emulating. And then, of course, we haven't really seen it take its impact in the Southern Hemisphere, and I think that's going to be a horror show. But America has not led. We have not been an international leader. We have not been sending aid out. We've been trying to catch up and scramble on our own side. There will be a lot of downstream political implications for this. I think it will, over time, create an awareness of why competent government matters, that we should strengthen our social safety net. When it hits rural America, I think some of the disparities in our healthcare system will become particularly acute in a way that forces people to pay attention. I also think there's a good argument to be made that in terms of domestic manufacturing, that there are sort of critical critical items that for national security reasons should be made in the U.S., that you should have, we can't be dependent on other nations for certain mission critical items. And you can do that through incentives, tax incentives. You can do it through tariffs, although I'm not a big fan. I'm generally more of a free trade guy. But that's another takeaway. And that's something that can unite people on the right and the left. Not everybody, but many. So we just got to figure out how to begin reuniting the nation and learning the right lessons. But what I think we need to also recognize is that this response, in many respects, will be seen as sort of what not to do from an executive leadership standpoint.
Two more quick questions for you, John. One of which is, I'm reading here, I wasn't sure how many there had been, but here's USA Today. The Trump administration has recently moved to oust 4 government watchdogs, and then writes about who they are. Most recently, Secretary of State Mike Pompeo decided to fire his department's inspector general. At first, the first reporting says because the inspector general is looking into Mike Pompeo and his wife asking certain government employees to do personal favors like walk the dogs and so on. But today there's new reporting out saying that the inspector general was looking into some kind of arms deal to the Saudi Arabians. But the bottom line is the fact that an administration would be firing inspectors general. It's, I don't know how unprecedented it is, but it seems like a pretty bad thing. I know you've been talking about this.
It's a very bad thing because, and I think actually Mitt Romney, now Senator from Utah, has spoken out eloquently about this, not relatively alone as usual on the Republican side of the aisle. Look, I think one of the most troubling things about what we need to confront in terms of where we are and how much work we have to do to come together again as a country. Remembering that, by the way, that a lot of the loudest voices are not actually representative of who we are as the country. It's just the way media is right now. It amplifies them artificially. Yeah. People should not believe that, QAnon represents the country, for example. But you also can't be sort of naive about when people in power amplify these voices for their own purposes. Inspector General are absolutely necessary to holding power to account. And I think one of the most troubling things about what we've seen isn't just that the president has been on a purge of inspector generals and a purge of his perceived political enemies among a nonpartisan class of government experts. The way that Dr. Anthony Fauci, who's basically, along with Debbie Birx, bailed out this administration because they have credibility across the aisle, that he's become a figure of suspicion and anger among Trump partisans is beyond unhelpful. It's a sign of a sickness. But when Republicans in the past have said, we need to make sure there's accountability, and they use this rhetoric of accountability to rein in, sometimes appropriately, sometimes not, Democratic presidents. What's troubling is that core principle of we need checks and balances, we need accountability, we need oversight, has been revealed to be, to a large extent, to the extent that Republicans are afraid to speak out about this or have rolled over for it or have accepted it, the rot of partisanship is so much worse than even I thought. And I've spent an enormous amount of my career being a town crier about it and saying that polarization is hurting our country. It's even less about ideas and principles than I imagined, because this president has, it's a Friday night massacre every weekend, it seems. And
it really is.
It's a real problem.
It's crazy
for our republic.
All right, last question for you. You've been working hard.
And I've got one for you after that.
Okay,
but go on.
You've been working hard a long time for on this book about Abraham Lincoln. Of course, you wrote your last book about George Washington, and so I went to see if your head had exploded last week, or was it 2 weeks ago, when the president sat down with the Fox News anchors in front of the Lincoln Memorial in Washington, D.C. there for an interview, which I guess he had to get special permission from the Parks Department to do. Nonetheless, at one point he said he's been treated worse than Lincoln. And of course, Lincoln was assassinated, and the entire internet, it seemed like he was just trolling the planet. But what do you make of his comparison to Lincoln, and where is the book at?
So my book is about Lincoln's plan to win the peace after winning the war. It's about Lincoln's vision of national reconciliation and reunification. And and the afterlife of that idea. But, the idea of a reconciling leader, a leader who preaches reconciliation, who tries to unite, not divides, and who uses the tools, the tools that Lincoln did, leveraging a reputation for honesty and integrity, someone who did not demonize people he disagreed with. He tried to empathize with his opponents so he could reason with them more effectively. Someone who showed that kindness is consistent with effective leadership. Over and over and over again, when you look at what made Lincoln great, which was the fact that he was good, that he combined goodness and greatness, and that's one of the things that's made him sort of a secular saint, if you will, of America's political religion. Donald Trump has consistently exhibited habits and instincts that are exactly the opposite of Abraham Lincoln every step of the way. It's inescapable if you pay any attention to the historical record. Trump's going to compare himself to anybody he wants, but when he does that in the symbolic shadow of Abraham Lincoln, he looks appropriately small. And when he says something absurd, like the idea that he's been more badly treated than Abraham Lincoln, even knowing that he doesn't care to know anything about American history, he proudly said before his inauguration, he told an American historian that he hadn't read any presidential biographies. That even that, people know is absurd on its face, and it just indicates how far out of historic depth the comparison of the two are. I don't think the lesson to take, though, is that America is in perpetual decline. Lincoln was bookended by two of our worst presidents, James Buchanan and Andrew Johnson, and still the republic survived. But it's important to recognize that we need to rediscover those leadership qualities in ourselves, and not just wait for a president to come on and save us.
All right. What was your question?
I wanted to know, because I didn't actually answer your question, but I'm curious, who you think Biden should pick for VP?
Kamala Harris.
You and I agree.
Huh.
Yeah.
Yeah, I just think that, you can argue for anybody, and you can argue the strengths of anybody.
There are plenty of good people out there, but tell me why. I wrote a column like a year ago floating the idea of a Biden-Harris ticket. If you can look it up online, I'm not exaggerating. Mm-hmm. But tell me why you think
Kamala Harris.
Kamala Harris.
Yeah, I don't know why I was thinking Stacey Harris. I don't even know who that is. I was combining people. Stacey Abrams.
Well, maybe a person, but
it is a person. I was a personal trainer years ago. I think that's where it came from. I think I've always liked Kamala Harris. I mean, there's plenty to criticize about her and everybody else, and I can make those criticisms. But I just think that she's a highly intelligent, hardworking, well-connected, likable, charismatic, attractive person. I think that she's tough. I think she was the Attorney General of California, a state bigger than most countries. I think that she is someone who is, young enough to understand technology, to be able to relate to a younger demographic. She's Black and Indian. She's, had a unique American experience. But most importantly, I think that she's not going to be backing down from the bullies. Not that anybody would, but I think she's just smart and quick and tough, and the perfect type of person to go up against Donald Trump. I mean, I'd love to see Elizabeth Warren for sure. I'm just not sure that she shores up. I don't know. I've been interviewing so many of the smart Black academics, intellectuals, political types, and a lot of people say that it's so important to shore up the Black vote, and they'll vote for Biden no matter what, but they'll be a lot more energized if they put a Black woman, especially, on the ticket. But I don't know if they're right, but they have been so far in the last two elections.
Well, we'll certainly see. I think one of the other factors about Warren is, even though Charlie Baker, governor of Massachusetts, is actually America's most popular governor and a great governor, if, for example, he picked Warren and they won, you'd have a Republican governor picking a senator. Presumably, It would be a Republican. So that's a factor in Warren's selection that's worth considering.
Yeah, that's a good point.
But interesting. Well, listen, it's so good to hear your voice, and I so much of what you've always preached, which is trying to find that elusive work-life balance, which none of us is a paragon of perfection by a long shot. This is a chance to work on a lot of that while we think about a lot of big things, because we got a lot of big decisions ahead of us as a country. This is a really impactful time, and though our worlds may feel like they're shrinking, like our responsibilities haven't.
I think that your kids right now are probably too young to be too deeply impacted by this, outside of just maybe not being, getting to be with kids their age, but they'll never forget the time that they had with mom and dad. I promise you that.
I think that's right. They've been writing jokes. My son's into joke. I was going to read you some of his jokes.
Nice.
But one of the jokes they've been telling each other, I admire what you do, partly because I'm always interested in sort of the language and rhythm of jokes. They came up with one the other day, which was, what's going on? The other person says, coronavirus, which is true.
That's
very so dark.
That's these two. They're maybe they'll be a duo.
It's not, it's not your standard, Dean Martin, Jerry Lewis, I'm not sure what you would call that.
Listen, I just like that they're working together, pal.
Yeah.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
That's great. Just like mom and dad.
That's we'll talk about, 6 and 4-year-old comedy duos on another conversation.
John Avlon, always a pleasure. All right. I can't wait to do it again. Thank you, sir.
Gotta go.
All right. Bye.
All right.
Okay, there you go. John Avlon, at John Avlon, and follow him right now on Twitter. Tell him you heard him right here on the show, and it's great to have John back. Thank you to everybody listening. Thank you to everybody with the paid subscriptions. Tomorrow or the next day, I'll read off all the names for all the new Patreon subscribers. Go to patreon.com/Ptomic, or just go to the paid subscription link in the show notes right wherever you listen to the podcast. Thank you so much for joining me today. Wednesday, you can join my wife and I for yoga. Check that out. Just pay me, get an email. I'll give you the code for that. It's $15. Anybody wants to do yoga with my wife and I. She's a great yoga teacher, and I love doing that every Wednesday at 9 East. Also, Thursday night, 8 p.m., we're going to do another live show. For anybody who is a Patreon, a paid subscriber, you can join me and my special guest, Professor Eric Siegel, and ask him whatever question you want to ask Eric Siegel. Thursday night, 8 p.m., we'll do a live video link, and then we will air the show Friday or next week. Okay, those are the two housekeeping details. Thank you very much for joining me today. Thank you very much to Bakari Sellers. Go get his book, John Avlon. And all of you for joining me right here on the podcast. We'll talk to you tomorrow.